How to weave an image. Now that you have your cartoon positioned within the warp and your entire warp is sitting on top of this picture, and you've considered the density of the warp in relationship to the grid spacing for the cartoon, it's time to get ready to weave. There are different approaches to this. The first thing you really want to do is see what your yarn weight relationship to the grid is as well, and that might inform how you start. I've gone ahead and laid out the 3 colors that I'll be using in this weaving, and this one looks a lot thicker, but they're actually in and about the same yarn weight. This one's a lot lighter, doubled. This is doubled, but the twist of it gives it a loft. See that air in between versus no air here? That means this is gonna end up packing down and being a little slimmer than it looks like. And this one should behave the same way. If I'm not sure how this yarn weight is going to behave within the relationship of the warp, the grid, the image, what I can do is make a quick sample miniature weaving and then look at that and then make adjustments as necessary. I already did that. I know this is going to work. Now it's just a matter of how I like to approach weaving an image. When you do an image, you isolate parts. If that image runs across the field, you work on parts of it at a time and consider connection points after weaving small masses. But within those small parts, there can also be complex color changes or moments of needing to change material. So what you want to do is make a decision. Are you going to start at the bottom and work your way up and change color as you weave up? Or some people like to go ahead and just weave out these small isolated moments in the image and then go ahead and weave around them and then go ahead and weave around that. That's up to you. What I find helpful is making sure that I have a cross. We talked about this when we were positioning our cartoon. It's really helpful for spacing the warp and keeping the density regular across the field. And I went ahead and dressed 2 crosses. And this is just pasta. I like using pasta because it's a little flexible, and honestly, it's always around. And then I also have a cross here at the bottom. So if I were to say I want to start by weaving out Matthew's eye, what I would do is not leave this this warp so open, because it's really vulnerable to being tensioned right now. It has no structure to it, nothing stabilizing it except these 2 spaghetti crosses. So what I would do in that case is bring the crosses towards the part that I'm weaving, and that's going to give this a lot of stability. See how it's not sliding around and moving anymore? And then I could go ahead and weave that. Move over here, weave this, maybe move this spaghetti down, weave the mouth. But the way that we're going to start is just by starting at the bottom of Matthew, weaving up. We'll get to here, we'll address the mouth. And what I know about my plan, my cartoon, is that each pick is 1 line of grid. So I can count the gridded lines here, and I'll know how many picks I have to make before I get to Matthew's mouth. Basically, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then you see the mouth starts. So I know that I'll go back and forth 8 times and just have to account for making sure that I draw out the edges of Matthew according to where they stop and start in the warp. Let's get started. So I have my needles dressed, and I dress all of the colors through their needles and have them prepared and waiting on the side. to get started, I'm going to count how many squares there are. That'll account for the warp ends. Our math is just a little bit off, so we're going to do it visually. This can be a very precise gridded process, just fulfilling a sort of a digital grid, or it can be a pretty like raw drawing process too. And honestly, it can be both. And if you decide to plan it out in a rigid way and you get through weaving half of it and decide to off-road and have a little more fun with it, you always can. We talked about boredom in relationship to weaving, and I think it makes for some really exciting moments in cloth when a weaver just needs to do something to keep themselves interested in the physical act of weaving. So I see that this first line, I'm just going to pick a tabby here. Oh, excuse me, I actually did this wrong. I'm going to come under my entire warp. And then I'm going to come out where the image begins to coincide with the warp threads laying over it. And the reason I come under my warp that way is I want to leave this length just hanging out and out of the way. I'll need to come and sew those ends in later. When the weaving is all complete, you'll have tons of little loose threads hanging, and then that's what finishing is. It's tying in those loose ends. So this is my first pick. And to start, you can kind of make the picks below where the cartoon is until you get a flow going and you begin to understand, okay, I'm just picking up 1 or 2 warp ends at a time. So you can adjust this, which is the nice thing about weaving, is the weft is a little mobile on the warp to start here. Now I know that I want to, pick up 1 here. I'm over. I'm gonna go tabby it out. Now this is the first warp end I went over. I'm now back under. So I'm looking, how many more warp ends do I go about? And the image brings me to about here. Okay. And as I make this pick, I'm going to bring this cross down just to keep those warp ends in place so they don't tension up. And I think the worst case scenario is that when you make your pick, you might draw the warp end in and it will make spaces and it'll make this kind of hyper pixelated looking image rather than letting the weft compress nicely in an even spaced warp and really start to fill in that picture. So now I'm going to beat up and lay that first pick across where it lands in that cartoon, and that's my foundation. It only takes 2 picks to stabilize a foundation and then really be able to just kind of go and fulfill that image. So am I picking up a line here as I come back through? Yes, but only by 1 warp end. So you can see this is guiding me. So I'm picking up 1 additional warp end. This was not part of this weaving, and now it becomes part of the weaving. And this is essentially image making. You're just deciding how many warp ends with each pick do you have to pick up for just that moment of that image to make sense. It's really easy when you're weaving an image to get caught up in the pan out, this entire image. Am I going to be able to realize this? But really all you ever have to be accountable to is that next step here in the cartoon. So you just want to take it moment by moment, pick by pick, And I'm going to go ahead and do this. There we go, and that's going to give me something to beat against. Perfect. And so again, I'm just picking up this one and going through, and then I decide how many do I have to pick up here. Quite a bit, it looks like. It looks like the image is ending here around this warp end. So I'm going to just keep my tabby and extend it. And all of this area where there isn't any weft, that's going to be filled in when we come back around and do the background to Matthew. So this will be a full, dense, opaque cloth. There's not going to be any open areas in it. But it is possible for you to make open areas even when weaving an image. Something to think about. Okay, now I'm coming around and I'm deciding, do I pick up more here? Yes, I do. I pick up only one more. So very simple tabby back and forth, just accounting for the edges so it helps me make my image. Here I'm picking up one more. I did. I'm pulling my length through. And the same logic applies to making a pick within an image as it does to making one across the entire warp plane, which is you don't weave straight across, you kind of make an arc. I'm also doubling up my yarn, so for me, I like to make sure that it is laying right and going around those warp ends really nicely and smoothly. And if it's a little too tight, which it feels like it, I can use an additional needle and just sort of pull that length back out a little bit. Loosen it here and then, yep, pull that. And so really do take the time with every pick to adjust this warp. You don't want the tension to get too out of control. It is hard to loop back and make adjustments. And sometimes I don't use a beater right away. I lay the line in with a needle. It's a little helpful for maintaining tension across a tight, short area. Okay. And we keep moving, and so now you can see that this line is starting to form here and here, where this image is happening. And another nice thing about the cross is it can be a little bit of a cheat in passing your shuttle or your needle or your bobbin through. So again, now I'm only picking up, I would say I'm only going to go to here, this line. So I'm going over it, but I'll pick it up by going under it on my way back. And you might be noticing that our yarn color is changing and making a kind of hazy swirl of purples and pinks and oranges. This is called variegated yarn, and it's dyed irregularly, and I think looks really good. It's primarily designed this way for knitting, but it looks really good in a woven image too. Gives a little texture and depth to something that could be rather flat. Like, no offense, Matthew, but you are monochromatic pink. You are rather flat. This Matthew will be a little more dynamic maybe. Okay, so I said I'm coming under this, picking that up. Again, doing tabby. And again, picking up one warp end on the left. And that is this one here. And I'm going over it, so I'll pick that up by going under it on the way back. And again, you see I'm taking the time to untwist my yarns to lay them in really smoothly and make that nice edge. And I make the arc, and I beat the arc down. Okay, and it looks like one more pick and we are ready for Matthew's mouth. And this is where things get a little interesting with image making. You get to decide. I'm kind of thinking, I don't know, I can sort of start his mouth now or make another pick. Pay close attention to what's coming up and what might need to offset the tabby above it, if any of that kind of stuff might inform that decision. I'm just going to go ahead and make one more pick to the right of my weaving, pick up that warp end I said I was going to get, and then I will lay in Matthew's adorable little smirky mouth. And I have to decide, do I pull more warp ends here? Yes, I do. Over, under, over. Okay. So even though I'm starting a new element in this weaving, bringing in a new color, working on a shape within a shape here, I also have to maintain that outline and remember to pick up or let go of warp ends as the image moves around them. Great, so that's really working here with that edge. I'm exactly where I want to be. The warp is not being pulled in too much. Things are looking pretty good. So I'm ready to make a pass. Now, there's a couple ways we can do this. We can continue to tabby and get that color tabbied in, or we can do a float. Please refer to the What is a Float video and have this blue color kind of riding above the warp and giving it a bit of dimension. Or we can abandon the yarn as a material and just kind of think, hey, wouldn't it be fun to just put an object here to mark that place in the image? And the way that I would do that, honestly, I would just lay it under there and let it hang out. So it's always good, and weaving kind of demands that we pause as new things are happening and acknowledge it and then plan around it. I'm going to continue using just the blue yarn, and I'm going to use the tabby technique. When we get to the eye, I'll do some floats. So all I want to do is come in here. When I get here, I'm going to come in here with the blue. And I can see I want to maintain the tabby, so I'm over the warp, I'm under the warp, I'm over the warp, I'm under the warp. So here I want to be under, and I think I want to come in right under here, go over here. So I, again, go all the way under the warp, and I only come out when I want that yarn present in the weaving. I can pull this all the way through, and I know that once I compress this blue and see where that lands, I know that I want this color to be tucked away here and sort of just go under the warp. And then once I do that, then I decide where it comes out again. This tucking under the warp gives you a bit of a visual access to the material as it's interlacing with the warp, and it just kind of cleans things up visually so you can see what's happening and make good decisions. I do not, my image ends right here, so I don't want to pick up this warp end at all. I'm just going to continue with these, and I want to make sure I do incorporate this warp end here. And this warp end here, you can see the image ends here, so I'm picking up 2. Picking up 1 and picking up 2. Over and under. Oh my goodness, look what I did. I went around the warp. I forgot to come back out. I guess that's a good mistake to make for a demo, just to show the importance of, yeah, paying attention to where your yarn is turning around and coming out of. That was funny. So I am over this, I'm just gonna come under that. And then that's my 1, that's my 2nd. And then let's see, I think that, yes. Okay, so Matthew's mouth has turned around, wonderful. And now I want to bring this area up. I only really want to be using these 3. That's where the image is. It's under those 3 warp ends. So I make that pick. I'm gonna compress it as much as I can. I see that the image here again is under these 3. So I'm gonna tabby. And then the image is only really here. So I'm gonna go over, and then I'm gonna go under the entire warp. And that is the end of Matthew's mouth. So you can see as we're weaving, we weave up to a point, then we weave out the detail, then we'll consume the detail, weave around it. But we could have done this several different ways. It's however you're comfortable and really however your brain processes this accumulation of material. So now I'm going to put my blue dressed needle aside. I'm going to pick up my pink dressed needle and come through here, and my yarn was last coming out of the warp here. I want to just weave in this area. I will bring in an additional separate needle and yarn to weave this area. So let's just start by weaving up here. So I came here, I do want to go under this, and then this is now 1, 2, 3 picks. So the next 3 picks we make are going to just end on this warp thread here. There we go, see? So you can refer to the color changing demo video, how to color change, to decide if you want to interlace your elements or leave the turnaround of the weft just side by side. Different things might make sense for different densities and different types of images. So that's 1. Remember, I'm doing 3. So that was the first pick. Now I'm going second pick, and I'm staying here, but I am paying attention to the fact that the line might pick up one more warp end here. And then I pull that through, and again in an arc. And see, these two colors are right next to each other. But they really do fill in the warp nicely because the turnaround packs firmly in between. So the colors look really kind of good and tight together, which could be really important for the clarity of the image that you're weaving. So that's the second pick, and now the third pick is getting made. We are just going back and again ending on that warp end. And then again, you have some decisions to make, because even though you could have planned really well for how you are going to realize this image in string, once you're actually doing it and making the necessary adjustments, you might find that when you thought you would be bringing the yarn after this third pick, technically we would be bringing it from left to right, you might find that it looks best to kind of smush this image and just go all the way across. Then you might find that you want to actually weave back down into the image, and then almost as if this is a kind of anchor point, just go up slowly. Or you might find that you want to work around some of this. This is really what image weaving is. It's a constant pause and replanning to make sure that the image is as clear as possible, and also sometimes to make sure that the most interesting things are happening texturally and with color as the image is being woven. What should we do for our video demo? I think what we'll do is, let's go all the way across. Why not? Before we do that, I think it's going to be helpful to count how many picks we have to make to complete this. So if we take this one all the way across, what's left to get back down here? So what's in between here and here? 1, 2. Only 2 picks. So that's actually going to be so easy. And again, I'm going to the edge of the image, so I am going to pick up one more here. And those 2 picks are actually going to be incorporated against the blue here. So I decided to kind of just smush this. I think it's going to make his smirk just even a little smirkier in the best way. Because it's not just about getting the color laying where you want it so that the image then kind of comes together. It's also about getting the kind of like attitude of the image, and sometimes the string will do something physically that supports that and makes it just look really a little more interesting. Okay, so now this is that first pick, where is that second pick? What we can do with this is come back in here and open this up and just get a little bit of a better look at this. And then decide. So this, we're kind of ignoring. Here we'll make that one pick, here we'll make the other. So let's go towards the blue, and then we'll see that we go under here, that the blue itself is over this one. So we're in the perfect place. We're in the perfect place just to make that color connection nice and tight. of course, we have to go back. And so yeah, sometimes when you start to work in areas that only have a little weaving space in them, it does put tension on the loom when you make your pick, and your loom will move. So if you're working on a small frame loom like I am, just kind of put your finger and put pressure down here and then pull through. And that's just going to prevent the loom from sliding across your floor or your paper. Okay. And so here we are. Now I'm going to comb this, compress this down, beat that down. And what we could do is we structurally could just stop here and compress it down and round out around Matthew's mouth. Pick that up a little bit. So again, when you're making an image, it's not just about where you lay everything, it's also about how much you beat, how densely you compress, where you let that yarn lay. And there's Matthew's little smirky face. Perfect. And then adjusting. You see the image is kind of showing itself here, and we could have brought the mouth up a little bit. So what we could do, if that was really important, we could just open this up a little bit and actually move the weaving by spacing it. And if it's not that important, you can just continue on. And so for this, we're done. We'll leave this as a loose end. We're not going to loop around this. And in order to do that, we just go over the last warp end and then under the entire warp and leave that hanging like we have the entire time we've been weaving Matthew. Okay. So we talked about weaving Matthew's eye using floats. Sometimes when you're weaving, you follow the tabby structure and go over, under, over, under. And other times you can bring in a material from the back, decide where it needs to lay, cross over all of the warp ends, not weave, not interlace, but rather float above the warp. And what that does is it makes kind of like a highlighted area. And floats add sheen because the light can hit them across more of their length. They're shinier areas. And you can see it even here on this cloudy day when I'm making the video. This is wool and this is wool. This is the exact same material, but this looks just so much shinier. So I can decide that I just want to do Matthew's eyeball with floats by looking at how many picks the eyeball makes up and which warp ends it goes across, and then essentially I can just, you're almost just wrapping because you're not interlacing. Oh my gosh, look what I did again. I went over the warp. It might be important to say that today is Sunday. It is January 17th, 2021. So here, you know, I've made my float, then I go under. So floats really do coil around and make pads on both sides. And you can kind of start to see too that, hey, this is essentially laying long linear elements across the warp without weaving them. And they too could be picked up if they were all laid out together and woven. So it is a bit of like making a warp across a warp. So you can make mini weavings, like Matthew's eye could be a beautiful mini weaving. But it is 3 picks, so I'm just gonna make 1 more, and then I'm going to drop the blue. And now's a good time to just kind of pause and tension. With the floats, it's important that they're not pulling the warp in, but it's also important that they're not super loose. Okay. And then I can just cut that line, leave that hanging in the back, and come through with my 3rd color, the cream, and then work to realize this white part of the eye around Matthew's little eyeball. And I'm gonna do this in tabby. And this really just takes place here on these 2 warp ends. So I'm coming from behind the warp and interlacing and pulling through and kind of like making a teensy tiny 2 warp end weaving momentarily to represent the whites of Matthew's eyes, smushing it down to frame up that nice float area. And then that'll be that. That's only 2 picks from my cartoon. And let's see, the whites here as well, only 2 picks and on these 2 warp ends. So I come in from the back, I go over under. Remember to just maintain, unless you're doing float, 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 maintain the tabby. And even if you are doing float, 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 you cannot make a weaving using mostly floats. A float should not go over more than 7 warp ends. Otherwise it can be a little bit fussy and give you some structural trouble. So here's Matthew's happy little eye. Look how thrilled. Now I'm going to bring in the pink again, start here, and start to address the edges of Matthew's eye. I'll cut this end off and put my white yarn to the side, getting my pink yarn that I have dressed. And then I'm gonna come in and see. This is getting pretty confusing. I kind of feel like, where the heck am I here? But what I can do is note that this pick was the last pick under Matthew's eye, and I can refer back to the cartoon, and I know that I have to start here. So I'm just gonna come in. I'm gonna go over this area, under, and I'm gonna turn around. And this is really up to you when you're making images. The whole thing you're doing is deciding when to pick up a warp end and when to drop a warp end. And you'll get better at it the longer you practice, the more you practice doing imagery. It's really its own skill set in weaving. But you can see that that is laying down quite nicely next to this white. It's under over, now it's under over, so everything is offsetting nicely. I've picked up some warp ends. Now I'm just going to go back, and it's becoming a little more clearer where to lay in that pink. And I know that I have one more pick to get even with the top of that blue eye. So I'm gonna make that pick. Do I pick up a warp end? Yeah, I think just one. I'm over, so I'll go under here. And then because this pick brings me even with the eye, the next pick I make can go across the top of that first lower eye. Beat that down a little bit and then turn around on the warp, pick up that warp end. And then I think the decision I would make here as a weaver is I would probably go all the way across. Not probably, let's just do that. Under maintaining a tabby. So the thing about floats is I'm floating above. There is no tabby to follow, but I have to maintain it. So I'm under, I'm going over, under, and I should, yep, hit that tabby. Great, and I think this stops right here. So I'm gonna bring that pink around. And I'm really still trying to get very nice edges here, so I'm taking my time with the turnaround, doing it in an arc, packing down very slowly, maintaining my selvages, and then we're getting Matthew's eye a little more defined. I'm gonna move that a little bit around. And so now I could basically bring this down and weave this and have the weaving not build up, but rather kind of like swirl in its build up. We have to see if our tabby works for that. And you know what, I can see that it does. So let's do that. And you'll see this in tapestry a lot. Things will kind of move around as they can. Sometimes it's to fulfill the image. Sometimes it's to just like maintain the structural integrity through the weaving, especially if there's a lot of spots like Matthew's eyeball, a lot of pause moments and additional colors. Okay, now I'm gonna beat this down a little bit. Perfect. This is so cute. Matthew really looks very happy in this weaving. And something that's happening is there's a little bit of an opening. There's a little bit of a tension issue here. And it's not beating down. No matter how much I push, there's this small opening. That's no problem at all. It just means our tension's off and we have to adjust our arch and almost like start over and just beat down a little slower and really pull the material in. And when it's not wanting, just kind of pull it. There we go. Yep, and then such small adjustments. What I'm doing is very slight adjustments pulling from the side here to get that. There we go. See how that's kind of falling into place now. Get that a little more tension. That is perfect. So it's just like another way to, we can even go back and make another pick. Let's do that all the way across. The more picks in an image you make that are fully across that image, the stronger that part of the cloth is going to be. So if you're making, let's say, a bust for a costume and you want it tapestry woven with lots of complex things happening, maybe it's floral print, And then say you want to be able to launder that costume, laying in some tabby across the entire plane is going to allow you to wash that, and it's going to allow the structure to withstand a lot of washing. So here comes Matthew, and in our image you can see that that white of this eye is already kind of asking to be realized. So let's copy the way that we did this eye and lay that in here. We'll do the floats and then a little bit of tabby, because I don't think making another pick across this is going to work. I think it'll go into where we need to start laying in that color. And I'm just pressing down on the warp, and you can see these are the warp ends. 1, 2, 3, 4 that we're going to be weaving. And again, how many picks? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm going to come in. And as I'm doing this, I'm realizing, you know, with the floats, as I go to lay it in, I realize there is a little space here. So I could dress the needle, an additional needle, and kind of have 2 working oranges going and fulfill the image from 2 directions, which could be a good idea. And that is what I anticipate doing. I'm going to lay this eyeball down before I commit to it 100%, but I'm pretty sure that's what's going to have to happen. So that's, the eyeball is 3 picks. That's 1 pick. Now 2. And then 3. And then I'm coming out from the back of the warp, since that's my last pick in that color. And again, adjust the tension, lay things down where they should be. Take the time to move your materials around. I'm going to cut off that end. Put that to the side. Position that a little bit better, and I'm going to bring in some pink, but not where the white of the eyeball starts. I'm going to end the pink here. So basically I'm going to end the pink on this warp end here, but I'm not going to bring the pink from this side of the weaving. I'm going to prepare an additional. Excuse me while I do that real quick. All I'm doing is taking some yarn off a ball, snipping off an end, doubling it through a needle, and we are ready to go. So these sort of things you can't always be 100% prepared for when you're doing an image weaving. So it's good to have all of your material. You can't see it because it's out of the view of the camera, but I have so much weaving material all around me to address any sort of issues that might come up. So now I'm just going to come from this side of the weaving, and I want to fill in and go over this warp end, and then that's it. So I come in here, and hopefully it won't make the woven Matthew look angry. The thing about weaving faces is sometimes a smiling face, if the direction of the yarn kind of moves in a particular direction, that yarn gesture itself can look like a frown, regardless of whether you're weaving a smile or not. I think that's kind of the fun part of this. And it's also a place where you can be rather subversive. make a smiling face that's doing kind of something a little bit more than smiling. Okay, so now I'm gonna bring this blue down, and now I'm seeing that my woven part of the white eyeball here takes 2 picks and will go across really only one warp end. It's a very subtle, small amount of white yarn, but sometimes these do make a difference. And that's it. I'm just doing this. Okay? So one tiny pick, but let's make it count and make it as visible as possible by making sure it's wrapping around the warp end. There we go. There we go. And then it's going behind the eye. So it's just a little corner. And then what does the cartoon want us to do here? It wants us to go over 3 and then 2. So again, I'm going to bring this 1, 2, this is the 3rd. I'm going to go over 2 and that's it. And again, make it count by making sure that it's as kind of puffy and visible around the warp ends as possible. A very small detail can make or break an image, and at the same time, it's important to know you're working on a very large piece and this is only one detail. I find myself getting kind of caught up when I'm doing image weaving, sometimes in a really small detail area. And then when I finish the piece, I realize that's not really a focal point at all. Nobody notices but me, you know? Okay, so this looks a little funky now. We have this kind of weird sweetheart neckline on the face. I think how I would do this is just go over and back and forth once and then twice. Let's see. We have to kind of build up here, get to here, and then address here. Maybe we can build up here, go over, address. Let's bring this down. This is another reason that having the cross here helps. There's always a tabby to kind of measure your decisions against. Like, okay, so if this is like this, what's actually the best way to fill this in? It does kind of like seem pretty easy to go across here. So let's start, address, go across, and finish here. And I think it's just going to take really just a few picks. This is not going to be difficult. I am, famous last words, let's zoom in. And then I am coming out from under here. So really, I'm just going to come back out and do a few more picks. I am kind of bringing this back and doing actually this. I just rerouted around one additional warp end with this. So unwove a little, and unweaving is such a big important part of weaving. And now I'm gonna fill that in. Now I am, you can see, over this warp end and under this warp end. I'm just going to turn right back around by going over this, under, and then trying to see if the structure, so if I go over, under, 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 over, and it does. That's perfect. So that's a great place to turn around for us. and get back to being able to make one pick across this woven image. And again, I'm still paying attention to my edges and only going out as far as the image of Matthew is. I'm going to bring this out and take the time to turn that material so that it lays in so nicely and packs down really well. And then this kind of looks like a funky little mess. Let's pack it down. There's Matthew's classic little half moon eye shape. And this looks a little funny because it's just not tensioned, it's barely hanging out. So if we were to bring that in, we can pack this down. And then you'll see like, yeah, that looks like a pretty happy Matthew eye. This looks like a pretty happy Matthew eye too. So I can go ahead, we have like a little bit of a funny floating area here. I'm gonna see if I can't bring this material now from the left all the way to the right, and if it won't sort of address some of this, if I do that, can I loosen this and will it visually make sense? But I believe what happened is actually we missed, no, here we go, let's just do it, let's just see. We want to be over this, so what we're gonna do is go back one more time because we know the tabby will offset. And then we are going to grab this. Actually, that's not going to work. And this is weaving, everybody, so really the demo can be over now, but let's just resolve this one conflict. I think this will do it. So it's a little bit funny, but I think it just looks funny. I think structurally we're in the right here, and we are actually completing a true tabby. It's just looking like this is floating a little bit more because of the way it was packed down. Let's see if that doesn't solve our floating warp problem. It's certainly nice that this lines up here. I think this is just going to make everything okay. And there we are. So now, believe it or not, even though this is so wavy, you could really maybe fill in just here and then go across, and this will all average itself out. So let's make just a little noise here. We'll fill in that tiny area. There we go. Do you see how it's really all starting to be able to be drawn across again? And then on the way back, just be careful. Make sure you're maintaining that tabby. again, we're making sure that we are just picking up enough warp ends to realize Matthew's outline. Okay. There we go. What do you think, Matthew? You think you look a little silly? A little bit. I like it. Oh, I'm really glad. I'm going to continue weaving this. The video demo is going to be turned off, but images of this will be uploaded and labeled, and this is going to be used to address any further image making questions. So as I run into more problems, maybe I'll add an additional like decorative image to work on. As a class, we can look at this cloth and how it came together, and then we can use the additional image as another weaving tutorial in real time. You're adorable, Matthew.